Welcome everyone to today's webinar on how to troubleshoot common performance issues within your Citrix and VMware Horizon environment. By ways of introduction, you have myself, Stacy Ladwinger, who's in the marketing department here at Goliath, as well as our senior technical consultant, Yemi Ladyju. Now, before we dive in, I do want to go through a few housekeeping items. First, the way this presentation will flow is we'll talk high level about many of the challenges you're facing when it comes to performance, especially with the surge of remote workers. We'll then dive into use case examples and give you an idea on how you can more effectively troubleshoot some of these common issues and show you the technology that can facilitate that troubleshooting activity from Yemi. Throughout, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will take time to respond, or if we don't in the middle of the presentation, we will get to them at the end. And yes, one of the questions we always receive is this webinar going to be recorded? We are recording this webinar, and we will give you this recording within 24 hours into your inbox. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I wanted to spend a few minutes just to level set. And I suspect many of you today have joined because you're facing a lot of these challenges that you see on the screen today. And many of these challenges can simply be summed up that you don't have enough visibility across your entire Citrix or VMware Horizon delivery infrastructure, as well as into end user behavior to quickly and effectively troubleshoot performance issues that are coming up daily. And in fact, these issues probably have only amplified and increased in the amount with all of your end users working from home. I talked to one client and they said, Stacy, now instead of supporting a handful of offices, I am supporting thousands of individual networks, which are home offices, all that can create different issues, and I have almost no visibility into that. And so we're going to dive into those challenges today. One thing I always like to step back, and many of you on the phone know this, but sometimes as you're talking to your managers or IT counterparts or even end users, it's hard for people to understand why it's so hard to get to root cause. The reason it's hard is really three core reasons. The first is the inherent complexity in delivering Citrix or VMware Horizon. So when many people talk about the infrastructure, they think that it is one piece or one solution. As many of you know on the phone, it is over 15 different vendors and technologies that need to come together and work in concert to deliver that high-performing end-user experience. And so at any point in time, any one of these elements could fail, resulting in poor performance. So it's not Citrix is slow. It's often an underlying issue that comes up, and the way the end user describes it to you and others, the help desk, Citrix is slow. Citrix is disconnecting. I talk to many customers that say 9 out of 10 times, the problem isn't Citrix, it's not VMware Horizon, it's something in this underlying infrastructure. So you take the end user, and every end user has a different endpoint, especially now, many are using their own home devices. You take then the environment they're working from, whether it is their home office, whether it is external in another environment, but they might even be within one of your own offices. Each of them are starting up then a custom session that factors in their overall behavior and environment. You're looking then at how they are connecting into the environment. Is it an established Wi-Fi connection? Is it a hotspot from a phone? How well is that ISP that they're running from home? So even before you've brought up the application, you already have a number of these elements all surrounding the user that you often have no visibility into. From there, yes, you go ahead and you start deploying the infrastructure. So you might go ahead and start deploying NetScaler, storefront, brokers, applications. I know we have some of you in healthcare today, and one of the major applications you're showing through is your EHR applications. Some might be in manufacturing. Maybe you're showing Oracle PV6, but a lot of these applications take intensive resources from the infrastructure that's coming out. You then have your layer of backend systems from Active Directory, SQL Server, licensing, and below that, your hypervisor host layer. So when you look at this, you have a very complex infrastructure, and any single point of these elements could fail, resulting in poor performance. So often, you do not have that end-to-end view that allows you to troubleshoot quickly. This is the first reason, that complexity in the delivery infrastructure makes it hard to address issues. The second reason is really simply there are not enough experts like you out there. Do the simple math. The amount of demand for Citrix or VMware Horizon experts far outweigh the supply. I was talking to a Citrix admin the other day, and they said, I am one person, and I am the only Citrix expert trying to support 5,000 users. I simply can't keep up. And then finally, maybe the third point, and maybe one that resonates with you the most here on the phone, is really the amount of time as an expert you spend troubleshooting basic issues. So you're spending 25, 30%, maybe even upwards of 50% with a surge of remote workers just troubleshooting basic issues for end users. Here you are supposed to be second, third tier support. Your days are supposed to be working on strategic initiatives to grow the business, and you're troubleshooting individual end user issues. So in order to overcome the challenges and the reason for those challenges, the ideal solution is really investing in purpose-built tools that will allow you to monitor and troubleshoot that end user experience end to end. And so when you start looking at tools, you need to think about it in 3 buckets. First, that tool needs to be able to anticipate issues even before end users are impacted. You're not going to save time until you can reduce the amount of issues coming in. And so that tool must automatically discover your entire Citrix or VMware Horizon environment, identify what to monitor, what thresholds to set, and then alert on those thresholds if they're exceeded across any of the potential events, conditions, and failure points that could impact end user performance. The second then needs to be able to identify the root cause of poor performance by correlating metrics across the endpoint, across the user experience, in the entire infrastructure I just spoke about. You need to be able to have a tool that has deep analytics that allows you to understand, is the issue with the device? Is it a drop in connection speed? Maybe you have a decommissioned driver mapped to group policy. Or is there an underlying resource utilization issue with the VM, hypervisor, or maybe even application itself? Being able to isolate that root cause allows you to resolve it much more quickly. And finally, you need a tool that's going to provide data to document the end user experience and overall system performance, and enable you to use that data to foster conversations with other IT teams, management, vendors, and users to collapse troubleshooting timeframes, but also to prove that permanent fix solutions have been put in place. It's also to go ahead and analyze trends over time, so again, that you can prevent the same issues from happening time and time again. When organizations invest in a tool that allows them to overcome these challenges, this is where they're able to truly move from reactive mode and get out of spending 25 and 30% of your time dealing with end user performance issues and more into proactive, and how do you deliver that best experience for your users regardless of where they're working, and reduce the number of tickets that are coming in. And when I talk about looking at a tool, one of the specific elements that you really need to analyze is, do those tools have embedded intelligence and automation that can automatically alert on any common failure points that you might see on the screen? When we bucketize a lot of the issues that we hear from our customers, they fall around logon initiation, logon duration, and session performance. But when a user calls in and says, I can't log in, or my logins are slow, or I have poor performance, the root cause of that is endless. And so you need a tool that can intelligently alert anytime thresholds are met against any one of these metrics, allowing you to prevent it in the future. And everything I just said, that is what Goliath provides. We offer end user experience monitoring and troubleshooting software for organizations that are using desktop virtualization from Citrix or VMware. So we deliver a single view that brings together and correlates data across user behavior and all IT elements that could potentially impact that end user experience, regardless of where they're located. So if you look at this next screen, we've been doing this for years now across industry. We're known as a healthcare IT standard because we do this across health systems, and we have purpose-built modules that allows us to not only look at user behavior and IT elements, but also all major EHR applications like Cerner, Epic, Meditech, or Allscripts. When organizations use our technology like those on the screen, they tell us it's as if they've added 2 experts to their staff dedicated to delivering a great end user experience and troubleshooting 24/7, 365 days a week, never taking a lunch break. And if you look at our logos, you can tell we can scale to smaller organizations as well as larger organizations. And we scale not only with our technology, but also with our price point. So with that now, I'm going to jump into what everyone wanted to hear, which is how do you really overcome some of those top performance issues that you're hearing? And we're going to break that down based on a list that we pulled our customers with, which really is logons are taking too long, #1 issue. Next is my system is slow, and my system is slow might be an application is slow. One we're hearing quite frequently and almost a top runner with a surge of remote workers is my sessions keep disconnecting. We have then I can't even connect to my application that's being delivered Citrix or VMware Horizon. And then another one that's really just manifested itself, and this often comes from a layer of management poking many of the admins, which is, how do I know if my team's really being productive while they're at home? Do they have access to the right tools to effectively perform their job? So with this, Yemi and I are going to drill into each one of these. So the first, I'm going to start with a user story. We are working with a Midwestern health system, and they came to us because their login times were over 2 minutes on average. And they had endless complaints from their clinicians that Epic was too slow. There was constant finger pointing then between the Epic application team, the Citrix team, the network team. Whose fault was it that these logins were taking so long? So together we came in and we identified many root causes. The team was able to execute and get rid of a lot of those issues and ultimately get those logins on average to under 30 seconds. And one example of where they found there was a number of decommissioned drivers, there was decommissioned printers that were all mangled in group policy. And there was no way to really understand why some group policies were working and others weren't. And it was the data and visibility that Goliath provided that allowed them to reduce those login times for a number of users. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yemi that's going to talk through the software so you can see how to actually use that in a troubleshooting scenario. Yemi?
Thanks, Stacy. I think you did a really good job there setting up, the context for this particular customer. So when you're, as an IT administrator, let's say, for instance, I'm getting a number of different calls, complaining about slowness, specifically when it comes to the logon times. In that case, I would flip over to the technology and specifically look at this page here, which is the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Session Display. And this is where all of the sessions in the environment will automatically populate. So in this particular case, the customer could see all of the sessions across the entire environment, not only their virtual application sessions, but also their virtual desktop sessions. They could, go back and see data or sessions historically. So we actually don't average or roll up any information we collect in the technology. So you can go back and see data or sessions from 2 months ago or 3 months ago, depending on how long you like to keep the data and the technology for. And you can see those sessions with the same amount of granularity as a session from today or an active session, which is really helpful, especially when you're talking about documenting and understanding what has changed in the environment over time that might be causing an issue today that maybe wasn't causing an issue in the past. But here you can see you can pull in all of those sessions. There's a quick filter here that allows you to search for anything that's in text. So if I'm looking for maybe iGel specific sessions, or if I'm looking for a particular application or something like that, as I start to type these sort of these metrics or whatever sessions that fit this criteria will automatically populate here. So I can quickly identify the sessions that I'm looking for, and then click down on those sessions and start the troubleshooting process. So as I click on an individual session, I get a lot of information showing up here with a number of different tabs. And these tabs really pull in together everything that goes into a user session, so that by the time that you've gone through this entire application or gone through the entire screen, you pretty much have all the information you need to come up with an answer. So if I start here from the top, right, I can sort of see the summary tab that pulls in a lot of that information. I can see there's a dedicated logon duration tab. There is a tab for the ICA connection, the app servers, the hypervisor hosts that are supporting the individual application server, or in the case of a VDI, that VDI VM. You can see the processes and applications that are running inside of the session. And then also you get the ability to sort of combine or pull in all of the alerts that have triggered on this machine, even down to the event log level, where you would see any application or system error or warning events that have taken place during the time frame of the session. Again, you're able to come up with a conclusion on what's the cause of the problem with all of this information here in a couple of clicks. But sticking with this individual or this customer example, they were having issues with specifically, again, with issues with logon. So here you'll be able to click here on the logon tab, and now you have all the information you need to troubleshoot a logon issue. This page really is broken down into two sections. You have the top section, which is a high-level breakdown of what's happening during the brokering stages of the process. So at the delivery controller, where you see things like drive mapping, printer mapping, session creation. You can also see what's going on at Citrix receiver. And this is without deploying any technology to the endpoint machine. You're able to see how long ICA file download took, or how long it took to establish the micro VPN connection, or if there are any specific delays taking place in the receiver startup process. This way, you can quickly identify if there are any issues related specifically to receiver or workspace app for this individual user session. But sticking with this particular customer example, here in the bottom section, we break down everything happening at the session host for this particular user. Here you can expand authentication. You can see what OUs this user is a part of, what domain controller was in charge of authenticating the session, how long the LDAP calls took to execute. And then specifically in group policies, you can expand this and see each individual policy that's affecting the session in this sort of Gantt or waterfall chart format, so you can quickly identify the issue, quickly identify the policy that's actually causing a problem. So in this sort of environment, you can see that there is specifically a printer policy, so a printer mapping policy, that's actually causing a majority of the delays inside of this PPO section. That is a quick fix. I can quickly identify that, take a look at the policy, maybe remove those policies for this particular user, and cut down the logon times drastically. So this is sort of the process that this health system went through when trying to identify, and it was in a couple of clicks. What they were able to identify was a specific drive mapping policy that affected the session. So let's actually flip over to the screenshots that we got from the customer, just to give you an idea of what they were looking at. So similar to that example that I just gave in the lab, you can actually see the entire logon process. In this case, most of those logon times were attributed to the profile load. And on expanding the group policy section, they were able to see a specific, excuse me one second, they were able to see a specific drive mapping policy that was pretty much taking a majority of the time. The drive was actually decommissioned, so there was a timeout period there. They were able to remove that policy and cut down the logon times very drastically. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy, and we can talk about some of the other challenges that we're able to address with the technology.
Thank you, Yemi. With this story, we're actually going to address two of the common issues that come up. So the two common issues we often hear then are performance is slow, whether it be Citrix or a specific application or VMware Horizon. The second is my sessions are randomly disconnecting. And so we actually worked with Penn National Insurance last year. They were rolling out a new virtual workspace initiative focused on expanding their remote working capabilities. They had seen a surge in remote workers, and they knew they needed to invest in a tool that would allow them to centrally manage that experience. They called us in because the project was almost put on hold indefinitely because some users were complaining about so much slowness that they couldn't even get access to their Cisco soft phones. Others were complaining that as soon as they opened the application, it was crashing 10 minutes later. And IT could not identify the root cause. Everything looked fine on their end. Everything was working great in their home offices. The end user said, nope, I'm not doing anything differently. So what they were able to do is once they put in Goliath, they had visibility into that overall end user experience and all the different factors that could impact the end user experience. And so here, for example, they were talking to one user and they said, and they actually showed them the screen and said, look, it seems like your performance is pretty good and you weren't kicked off at all throughout the morning. And then it's around 2:30, 3 o'clock that we start to see a dip in performance. And we saw that consistently through some of the different days. And they asked that user, would you agree? Is that when slowness occurred? And they said, well, yes, that you're right. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's pretty good in the morning. It gets worse in the afternoon. And so the admin then said, well, what happens around that time? And the end user said, well, my kids come home from school and I guess they usually go online and start using the gaming system. And so what they were able to see is a correlation of slow logon times with a dip in internet connection, and then really identify what was going on in that home office environment. And so at the end of the day, the end user needed to go ahead and upgrade their ISP. And they found multiple pinpoints where there were specific instances in how an end user was connecting remotely that was impacting performance. So they were able to resolve those issues. They were able to show to management that this was not a pandemic hitting everybody. There was a few different users, all that had different edge cases on why it wasn't working, and ultimately successfully deployed the virtual workspace. And I think very grateful they did, because they were well ahead of being prepared for the remote working surge that occurred this year. Yemi, do you want to talk through and show how Penn National was able to go ahead and troubleshoot slow session performance and that ongoing disconnect issue?
Absolutely. With that, when you're talking about troubleshooting, similar to the first example, the first page that customers will go to is this one, which is that session display. And again, you can isolate the sessions. You can pull up an individual user and see all of their sessions for the last, 30 days or something like that. And then once you've isolated the sessions that you want to click on, you can then click on those sessions. And again, you have basically all the information you need to troubleshoot issues. Now, in the first example, we went over to the Logon tab to take a quick look at what was actually affecting those sessions. But in this case, we're going to start off and sort of walk through the scenario and walk through how our customers, in this case, Penn National, was able to use the technology to come up with these sort of answers. So first things first, the first thing, when you're talking about in-session performance, the first section that customers are going to look at would be in the summary tab, the ICA round trip time. And this is to show or to prove that a user is or is not having a problem, right? So round trip time is going to, is basically the time it takes for a user to interact with the environment, to go through the network to the session host, and then back to the user. So in this case, they will be able to see, okay, when are the times that the user is actually having a problem? Citrix recommends that if round trip time goes above 450 milliseconds, for a sustained period of time, that's actually going to be very apparent to the user. This user is definitely having a problem. However, what we've also seen is that users can have issues depending on the application or the environment that they're in. They can have issues sustained in their environment if their round trip time is above 350 milliseconds. So in this case, if I'm looking at this particular session, this user probably isn't having the best experience. So then we want to understand why. What is actually driving that poor performance? Is it a resource problem, or is it an issue taking place between the network? That's when we can look here at network latency. This is real-time network latency, not a typical ping-based or ICMP network latency. This is something that we're getting from the ICA protocol itself, telling us specifically if network performance is actually what's bottlenecking this particular session. And what we can see here is that network latency and round trip time are basically about the same, and they sort of mirror each other for the entirety of the session. So what this tells us now is that it isn't a resource problem or a host problem or something with the application or desktop that they're using. This is actually some sort of issue between the workspace client or receiver and the VDA machine. So that gets us really close, but it doesn't give us the full picture. That's when, in this case, Penn National would look here at connection speed, and this is the amount of bandwidth available for receiver or the workspace app at the user's location. So wherever this user is connecting in from, in this case, a home office, but we've had users obviously connecting into Citrix via uh, mobile hotspots or connecting in from a public Wi-Fi and things like that. And this specifically tells you how much bandwidth or what is their connection speed, or basically their download speed at their location. So in this particular case, you can see here that the connection speed is really poor, dropping below 1 megabit per second, which really isn't good enough to actually have a consistently good session. So in this case, if I was troubleshooting this issue, I'd get on the phone with the user and sort of walk through that talk track that Stacy just did, where it's like, okay, where are you connecting in from? Where are you in proximity to your router? How many people are on the network? Maybe can you plug directly into the modem to get a better session? But typically without this information, it is really hard to have these sort of productive conversations with end users, because this information is typically a blind spot. And let's talk a little bit about the case where you're seeing disconnects. Because our technology is going to pull up either disconnected sessions, or it's going to pull up all of the sessions that the user has, whether it's logged off or disconnected. It's going to show these as different sessions. What ends up happening is IT is able to quickly identify disconnects based on the last latency metrics that were taken during the user sessions. So what we typically see is that a user could be having a really good session, and this was exactly what Penn National was seeing. User could be having a really good session, and then ultimately, altogether, at the end of the session, they get a really high spike in network latency and round trip time, and that correlates with a drop in connection speed. That tells the administrator that this user had some sort of issue at their location that actually caused that disconnect, maybe a drop in connection speed for about a minute or so. Maybe something happened at their router, or maybe there's something happening on their endpoint machine. But however, Citrix was not able to have enough bandwidth or enough connectivity for their session, and that was actually the root cause. And that's exactly how Penn National was able to use this to identify those sort of issues. And keep in mind, we're able to do all of that just by looking at the summary tab. We have a dedicated tab for the ICA channel here that sort of breaks down some of these other metrics like ICA latency and their session bandwidth, so that you can even take deeper steps in troubleshooting and understanding not only their connection, their bandwidth, but also the user behavior and how they're interacting with the environment. As you can imagine, there is a lot of information here, and some of this information really isn't available. So inside of any one of these tabs that we have in the technology, you actually have this question mark icon here that takes you directly to our support center, and specifically the knowledge base section, where you could take a look at any one of these tabs, in this case, the ICA HCX tab, and it defines the different sections, defines the metrics, and it tells you in sort of a quick format how to use these metrics to troubleshoot and come up with answers quickly, leveraging the metrics that we have in the environment. So this is typically how it's used, not only to sort of solve issues and get to the bottom of them, but also as a training tool to onboard help desk or anyone else when troubleshooting issues. So with that, I'm going to go back to the slides here and talk a little bit about specifically the screenshots that we got from Penn National with that story that Stacy mentioned. Here we're looking at a user session, and you can see that at a particular time, there was a spike in network latency, connection speed, and ICA latency. A spike in network latency, ICA latency, and ICA round trip time that directly correlates with a drop in connection speed in this next graph, which tells us specifically that this was a user endpoint location issue rather than something that happens that happened from an IT perspective. So you've been able to troubleshoot issues. Now, how do you document these sort of things? Not only to show trends, but to sort of show how these things have improved over time, and sort of show that you've been able to prevent these issues from happening. We have a number of different reports that sort of break down each one of these different sections, whether it's overall user experience, logon time, so on and so forth. Here's an example of one of them, which is the user experience report that sort of pulls in at a high level all of these sort of things. So you can see the usernames here on the left-hand side of the screen, what applications they were using, of course, whether they had a good session or poor session as far as from a latency perspective. You break down the logon times, their ICA latency, as well as their connection speed at their user locations. These sort of reports can be run on a weekly basis, monthly basis, just to really understand and show management the improvements that you've made in the environments, or to show exactly how the environment is as far as for baselining and other things like that. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy, and we could talk about some of the other challenges that we're able to solve.
Great, thank you, Yemi. Here's another one that we hear quite often, which is I can't even connect to Citrix, or I can't access one of the applications that I need. And this is something that we heard quite frequently with a health system where they spanned 21 different states. So when they came to us, they said that in order to avoid, I can't access Epic, or I can't access Meditech, they actually said they were having their admins rotate and go in at 5 in the morning and launch applications from different spots inside the hospital. And they were doing that across the US at all different hospitals. And so we worked with them and said, what if we could do this automatically? What if we could proactively monitor all of your business applications and alert you anytime they were down or having a performance issue? So we went ahead and implemented that. Now they avoided that manual effort. But more importantly, they were able to prevent an outage for over 25,000 users by being alerted at 4:30 in the morning that one of the apps inside Epic Hyperspace was unavailable. They used screenshot evidence to isolate the specific root cause and where that failure point was, and they were able to get it fixed and working before most clinicians signed on to start their day, saving them a significant amount of time and effort, but also money, because within health systems, like many of your areas, downtime is money. And so they saved that. They were able to deliver the quality care that they strive for and ultimately avoid something very damaging to the overall IT department. Yemi, do you want to show a demo of how the application availability monitoring works?
Absolutely. Before I sort of jump into the demonstration, I just want to give it a little level set, or spend some time to level set and understand, exactly how this is deployed and how customers use this. So if you look on the slide here, this is sort of the typical deployment of the application availability monitor. And then in this case, for this health system, this is how they actually deployed it to test the availability of their Epic Hyperspace application. The technology typically is deployed, the lightweight piece of technology is typically deployed on a VM or workstation, maybe even a laptop, at each of the different sites where users are located. So whether those are maybe in a sort of, if they're pulled in together in a geographic region, if there's specific hospital locations or clinics and things like that. And from these different locations, this software, this technology is logging on and launching the applications, in this case, the Epic Hyperspace application, making sure that is available, that application is available 24/7, 365. So instead of having admins go out to each one of these locations to log on before users start their workday, this technology is taking care of that, but it's also going through the work hours and after maintenance windows and things like that, so they can actually identify issues before users start to complain about them. So to give you some perspective as to what's actually taking place from these different locations, I have a quick video here showing this technology actually launching an Epic session. So from that location, it's able to open up a web browser to the NetScaler storefront page. It's able to log in the same way an end user would. It's then able to accept any security statements, confirm that the storefront page loads. It can navigate the storefront page if needed, and it will then launch the application. And just to make sure that there's a successful presentation of the application. Once it does that, it logs off. And if there are any issues with any step of that process, IT gets a real-time alert and the ability to analyze each one of the launches from this view here, which is the Application Availability Analysis tab inside of the technology. So here you can see that this page is broken down into two sections. You have the top section, which is sort of a high-level dashboard of all of the launches taking place across the entire environment. And you can see here, you can filter this based on the date range, based on the locations that you're launching these applications from. You can even filter based on the applications. In this case, we're pulling up the Epic Hyperspace application. This sort of dashboard is typically used a lot just to understand, okay, what does availability look like for the day, for the week? A lot of times people send this over to management or some of their, if you're hosting an environment or something, send it over to the customer and show, okay, this is what availability has been from a synthetic monitoring perspective. Now, the bottom section, this is where typically customers will go when they've gotten an alert and they want to understand, okay, what has happened? Why did I get that alert? And what actually caused that failure? So here you can see the date and time of the specific launch. You can see the application that was being launched, where it was being launched from, the session host that the application was actually being supported by, and of course, you can see whether the application launch was successful or if it failed. And if it did fail, you'll actually be able to see at what stage it failed. And to take it even further, you can actually click here on this magnifying glass icon. And what it does is it shows you screenshots of each step of the process up until the successful presentation of the application. So for this particular health system, they actually had a maintenance window. And then the admin tested the application right after, and it worked for his credentials. So the application showed up on the storefront page. You clicked on the application, and it presented successfully. However, that was just for admin credentials. When users, a user would try to log in, the application didn't show up on the storefront page. Now that's a simple Citrix configuration issue. However, if the user started their workday with this sort of problem, it probably would have taken them about an hour or two to solve because of the influx of tickets, so on and so forth, which then caused them a lot of downtime. So this technology actually caught these issues at 4:30 in the morning, and they were able to get ahead of this, use the screenshot evidence to confirm that the application wasn't showing up on the storefront page, and they were able to solve the issues before users actually started their workday and prevented the downtime completely. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy and we can talk about the next criteria.
So the last issue, and this might not be quite around performance, but it really does go to end user activity. And we've gotten this question quite a bit with the surge in remote workers. And it's asking for visibility. Can my workers be successful while they're working from home? What does their typical workday look like? Are they getting in the same hours? Are they interacting with the same applications? Is there anything preventing them from being productive? And this is what Empire Office came to us. They are a family-owned business. They had 2 floors in Manhattan, so everyone was commuting into the office and working together. They were already enabled with Citrix workspaces. So it was almost a non-event when everyone had to be working from home. But the management team really wanted to understand, both from a mental and an infrastructure standpoint, could their employees be productive? And so they turned to us to use our end user productivity report to really identify how active users were in their Citrix sessions, what was their max time of inactivity each day, when were they starting their day, when were they logging off from their day, and also what applications were they accessing. And this was not to be Big Brother. I really want to emphasize this because I've talked with a lot of administrators and others that say, I don't know, this seems like a lot of power. And what I say is it's just one view into how people are being productive or not. And it's really understanding if they have access to the right applications. And this report itself, Empire even came back and said, it spurred a lot of conversations about how can we improve the quality of the remote worker experience for our employees. What they found is their employees were working more hours. They were logging in sooner. They were staying on longer in the day. They would see, especially when school was still in session, that some users would log in 5 in the morning. They would work till almost 10 a.m. and then they'd come back on around 2 or 3. And what they learned is that many of their employees were homeschooling their students during that time. So it wasn't that they were less productive. It wasn't that they were working less hours. They were working differently because of their circumstance. But they did find that that flexibility was driving employee satisfaction. And so all of this is just a single data point to really ensure that you have a pulse on those remote workers when you don't have access to them every day. And it's giving you an idea of, can they be successful in the environment you've created? Yemi, do you want to talk through the report that Empire and others are using?
Absolutely. Yeah, and this is the specific report that they run, which is the end user productivity report. And what this does is typically our customers will run this on a daily basis. And what it does is it breaks down the users in the environment over here on the left-hand side of the screen. You can see their users, you can see their endpoint IP address, you can see what infrastructure they connected in via, their session start date, their the current session state. So whether that's maybe an active session, a disconnected session, or logged off session. And then you can see at what point that it changed to that specific particular state. The values here that are very important are now sort of the duration of their session, the amount of time that they were actually interacting with their session, so actually creating ICA traffic, rather than just moving the mouse every 15 seconds or something like that, or 15 minutes. And you can also see, conversely, the time that they weren't interacting with the environment. So, and these, I wanted to point out that this is very different from the standard way that Citrix or Microsoft is able to calculate what they call idle time. This specifically is taken into consideration a number of different metrics that allow us to identify, pretty accurately how active a user is inside of their session. So here you can then see the interaction time or interaction percentage, as well as the max inactivity inside of their session. And this is what, Stacy pointed out, where users might take a break maybe during the middle of their session to go do other things that come with being able to work from home, but still come back and have very productive sessions and get their work done. So having this sort of information really enables management to understand how users are working and what they need to do to be able to support users and have them continue to be productive even from a work from home environment. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy, and then we can wrap up and go into questions.
Thanks, Yemi. So yes, we're wrapping up today's session. I have a few questions that have come in. If there's others that you have, please submit in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. Now, one question we often get is, how hard is it to implement these kind of services? We work with our customers to get them up and running in less than 2 hours. And we do that with a very strategic approach. We have a white glove implementation service to help install. You then work with our technical consultant to leverage the out-of-the-box reports and alerts that we discussed. We walk you through some of the common workflows. We have a number of documentation to show you how to do a troubleshooting workflow. So if a user is calling in because my session is slow, we guide you in the steps on how to identify what is causing that slowness, just as Yemi did today. And maybe most importantly is we have that embedded intelligence and automation. Again, our customers tell us it's as if they've hired almost 2 full-time troubleshooting experts into their team, because we're automatically identifying what those metrics are to measure, what thresholds to set, and to alert you. And by leveraging that intelligence, it automatically makes you more effective. So with that, let's go ahead and turn it over to questions. So Yemi, let me get into the Q&A here. First question is, Is there a macro view I can use to troubleshoot issues that could be impacting users at a broader level?
That is a good question. And the answer is absolutely. I'm going to flip back over to the technology to sort of show these sort of things. So right now, what we're looking at is the automatic discovery and dependency map for Citrix. And sort of as the name implies, this will automatically discover all of the components that help deliver Citrix in the environment. It will then map them out. And then on top of that, it will add over 350 monitoring rules to the environment. These monitoring rules are monitoring for conditions, failure points, thresholds, and events that actually can cause an end user experience issue if they're not taken, if they're not taken care of. These monitoring rules then drive a heat map structure. So as issues take place on components, they start to turn red or orange depending on the severity. So that's why this is heavily used as a knock view, because this is a overall sort of a macro view of the entire performance of your infrastructure, and then some other views down to user experience. So here you can see the storefront servers, the delivery controllers, any supporting servers. Customers have the ability to flip back and forth between multiple data centers. So this functionality does have sort of innate multi-tenancy. But as you click on the components on the right-hand side of the screen, you can then see resource utilization, context-specific health checks based on the role of the server in the environment. And then you can also see here at the bottom of the screen any alerts that have triggered off on these components. Keep in mind that if you wanted to take a closer look at any one of these servers or components, you can click here and drill into sort of our snapshot metrics that go deeper into the performance of those particular components. I can drill now here into the delivery layer, and what I get is a sort of a logical breakdown of the environment. So here I can see my delivery controllers, my delivery groups, machine catalogs, gold images if those are available. And I can also click down on a delivery group, and now I get a build out of the machine infrastructure supporting this particular delivery group. And as you can see, if I go down the line of the components, on the right-hand side of the screen, I can see average end user experience metrics as well as infrastructure metrics that correlate with those sort of things. So we talked about the network latency and the connection speed for all of the users that are being a part of this particular delivery group. But then you can also drill into the machine catalog and get metrics associated with that. Drill down to the hypervisor cluster and even the individual hypervisor hosts that is supporting this delivery group. So as a question asked, for a macro view, trying to see if there are components that are driving sort of negative performance to a bunch of users, this view will point you to that because of the heat map structure. And then you can see metrics like average ICA latency or round trip time for all of these components, all of the users that are on these components, so you can sort of quickly point to a specific component causing problems in the environment. Hopefully that's able to answer that question specifically.
Great, thank you, Yanni. We have a few more that have come in. The next is, do you integrate with third-party products like IT service management, like a ServiceNow?
Sure, absolutely. That is a number of our customers leverage our tool and send up alerts from our technology and even some of the metrics via a number of different methods like syslog, SNMP, SMTP, so on and so forth. So the answer is yes, we do integrate with a number of different tools that are out there.
And then what reports do you have around logon time?
That's a good question. Yeah, so as you saw in the demonstration, we do have a number of different we do collect a lot of metrics when it comes to the logons for users. And what we've heard from customers is that they like to see some of these things trended over time. So we have a number of different reports that we can show, and I have a slide here I can pull up. Might give you some additional insights there. So here you can see a sample of our Citrix virtual apps logon duration report, where we break down the user, of course, the connection time, whether the session was a reconnect, so obviously if they had a disconnected session, their logon times as a whole. You can also see the different stages of the logon process as well. So whether it's not only whether it's server and client validation and group policies and things like that. I know a lot of our customers use this, and they run these on sort of a weekly basis in the environment, or maybe even a monthly basis, to understand, okay, what portions of the logons do we need to tackle next? Or maybe even to show management, hey, this section of the logon process is taking long because we need to upgrade our hardware, or we need to implement new technology. So this is used not only to document the user experience, but to use that to be able to get information or justify any fix actions moving forward. We have another report here that I think breaks things down a little bit more, and this shows how customers are able to export or sort of transform the data that we collect inside of our technology. So here it breaks down logon times over a specific time period, but also breaks it down per location. So you're able to see not only the dates, what the logon times are for a particular date, but you can also see it for a location, and even breaking it down further at the bottom of the screen, still leveraging or still seeing the different sections of the logon process per date, per location. So as I mentioned, we do have a lot of information available in our reporting and our technology, and our customers are able to sort of export, transform, and visualize these tools in other sort of third-party visualization and reporting tools, like, let's say, Power BI or Tableau, or maybe even Excel as well. Hopefully that answers the logon duration reporting question.
Great. And Yemi, another question is, how are you different from free tools like Citrix Director?
That's also a very good question, and we get this one a lot. So I actually have a slide prepared for that. I would say that the major differences between our tool and something like Director, which is a very good tool, is that Director does a really good job of telling you that the problem isn't Citrix. But as we all know, a lot of times when there are problems in the environment or with a user session or something like that, it's usually not a Citrix problem. So if you look on the slide, Director, and we got this directly from Citrix's website, of course, Director is going to monitor all of the components and areas here that are not red. However, as we all know, to get full end-to-end visibility, you need to be able to monitor everything that goes into the user's experience. So their locations, the applications that they're using, the different hypervisor tools that are available. You need to monitor the VMs, and some of the back-end systems, and even get detailed metrics into their user experience, their devices, the networks, the printers, and things like that. So what our technology does is going to monitor everything here on the screen to really give that end-to-end visibility. And then the other thing would be the historical data. Because we don't average or roll up any information, customers are able to leverage the historical data to really understand the environment and do retroactive troubleshooting, or even baseline, and understand what needs to change in order to improve user experience.
Great. Thank you, Yemi. And we have one last question, unless anyone else has anything on the phone, and it's, what metrics can you alert on to customize thresholds?
That's a really good question as well. So, we did mention earlier in the call that we have over 350 monitoring rules. And these monitor for conditions, failure points, thresholds, and events, and things like that. So actually, I'm going to jump back into the technology and see if we can sort of show some of the metrics that we deploy into the environment on deploying or implementing our technology. So this is our monitoring rules page, and this is going to sort of just gives you an idea of some of the things that we're monitoring for whether it's Citrix specific conditions or failure points, whether it's VMware specific or just Windows specific. We have the ability to monitor these things, and then you can customize the thresholds on implementation and things like that based on how your environment runs. But so we're monitoring for everything, whether it's in the event logs, whether it's presents in Windows perfmon counters, and even user experience metrics that typically wouldn't be available in any other tools.
Well, great. Thank you, Yemi. That concludes our webinar today. If you do have any additional questions, or if you're interested in a free trial of anything we showed you today, please contact techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com and we will get that set up for you. Also, as I mentioned, you will have this recording in your inbox in the next 24 hours. I hope everyone has a great, safe, and healthy day. Thank you. Bye-bye.